This is season 2 of Rise and Thrive with Dr. J. Nicole.
Yeah, we stepping our life, feel good, we alive, everything aligned. Yeah, we rise and thrive with Dr. J. Nicole. Give a long way, yeah, we still growing. Feet on 10, yeah, still showing.
Good morning, and welcome back to another episode of Rise and Thrive with Dr. J. Nicole. And we are being graced with the presence of Dr. Christopher Cross. You've seen him before, but today he's back talking main character energy. And believe it or not, there is a science behind it. So we're going to get into all things, but first, welcome, Dr. Cross.
Thank you for having me, Dr. J. Nicole. I'm so excited to be back, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, well, you already giving main character energy, okay? You got me mesmerized already. It's been 2 seconds. Hello.
Look, let's do
Okay,
it. I mean, you always got me mesmerized too, so let's just not even play that game.
It's mutual, right? It's mutual. So Chris is really gonna help us understand some of the science in a very downloadable way that goes behind it and understanding like relationships and what like being main character really means.
Mhm.
And we're just gonna like understand all the parts that come with that. So from with all of the wisdom, knowledge, lived experience, degrees earned, all of that, you like break down what main character energy means.
So I think it's important to start with a little exercise.
Okay.
When was the first time that you think you experienced main character energy? And I think I'll do the same thing. But
Okay.
when you answer that, that kind of will help give context from where your baseline is and where my
Mhm.
baseline is. And then we'll align and then we can kind of move forward after that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
All right.
Well, they didn't call it main character energy, but according to my mom, I had main character energy as a child. And so we're talking like 4, 5, where she would just say I would want to like entertain people and like be in the middle of the room. And just like the kind of like the center of attention, but not in an obnoxious way, but I was very engaging as a child. But then I would say from there's so many levels to this because I didn't have language for this.
Uh-huh.
Like there were times in my life where people didn't like me just for breathing. And I
Interesting.
first really experienced that in undergrad. And I had no idea because I didn't know I was main character energy, right?
Uh-huh.
But knowing it and really embracing in it, I would say in the last 2 years, I've really been operating in it, but I've gone through that thing where people have been threatened by me and I had no idea why. I know that was a multi-part answer, but
No, no. I mean, you talked about like attention. I think that that is such a key attribute that is connected to main character energy.
Mhm.
Right? Because there's this aspect of people being drawn to you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That I do think is connected to a strong component of it for sure. And then you picked up on another piece where people can tend to be intimidated by it,
Mhm.
right? And then have different responses to it. I think for me, one of the things that my sort of moment where somebody told me I had main character energy in my mind, like to your point, we weren't using those words, but I was an undergraduate researcher and my, lab PI, which is principal investigator, we were in her office and she was like, "You have such strong presence, Chris."
Yeah, that's that language. Yep.
And I was like, "I don't know what that means." And it was one of those moments that have stuck with me throughout my life because
Mhm.
in a way, I was offended by it, right?
Okay.
Initially, I was like, I'm here to do research and science. I'm about capability. Like, I'm not even thinking about, in that moment, I was connecting presence to aesthetics, but that wasn't what she was saying. She was talking about an energy.
Yeah, because you weren't trying.
Exactly. Because I was quiet, right? I wasn't even talking about the science or my experiments at the time. It was just her take on my existence in her presence, right? That
Yeah.
I had presence. And so as I've gotten older, I've honestly had a hard time understanding what that meant and being okay dealing
Uh-huh.
with main character energy. And you kind of talked on that too, like when you were being yourself in these different environments, people had a negative response to it. In a lot of ways, I was getting attention in ways that made me uncomfortable
Oh,
because
yeah.
I didn't understand it.
Oh, yeah. Went through that too.
So I think like these are sort of, I think, for our audience listening, I want them to also kind of think about their moments when they've had similar conversations, whether it's a mentor who pointed something out they didn't understand, or if it was a loved one being like excited and cheering you on. I think those are elements of it. And so I think as we transition, I will say there
Yeah.
are 7 types of main characters, at least that I have come to find out, in my own sort of
Yeah.
research way.
Okay, so I love this. So basically, you just said that everybody is a main character, essentially. There's 7 types, right? And the way that we even stumbled upon you coming back is that we were just having a casual conversation, and you were telling me that you believe that everybody has a role, if you will, like in the cast, and that's main. And if you know your role, you can play it right, and you'll never have to compete. So can you just like kind of like talk about that a little more?
Yes, I think one of the big words is miscast,
Oh,
right? I think when we talk about roles and casting, a lot of us are being miscast into different roles that then creates that friction and creates
okay.
that sort of like uncomfortability. And as we kind of anchor this in sort of physiology, that friction, that uncomfortability manifests as stress. It's higher cortisol levels that's happening,
Mm,
right? I'm not getting as much rest, right? I don't feel aligned. A lot of those are connected to misalignment. That's exactly what a miscast moment is. And I think that when we talk through the different types, you'll see like, okay, one of these will probably resonate with you or a combo of the two. But what happens is, when you've gone to different environments, and that's why environment is so key. I think a lot of us can think of spaces or times or places where you're like, that was just so great. Like I felt like I could be myself and that was being received well. And in a lot of ways, you felt aligned and you end up leaving that experience charged.
yeah,
Physiologically, you're like, I feel lifted, right? That dopamine hit is like surging and it
yeah.
honestly feels sustainable. I think that's part of like the, way to know if something's kind of working in your favor.
Okay. Are you ready to get into the types? Let's
I
get into
am. I do.
these. Because I was
High
like, we
level.
don't have to let them sit on the edge of their chair for too long, right? Because I
Right.
think as we get into them, like, I can see that being a bulk of the conversation, right, today.
Mm, of course. All right. So number one is the architect. And so you can kind of think about the words kind of are on the nose, so you don't have to kind of dive deeper. But what I will say, I'll name the type and then I'll name the miscast symptom.
Okay.
So the archetype, when the archetype is miscast, resentment when others don't step up. And you're like, why is this other person not doing what they need to do? Because the architect is at the system level.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe give a little, but I like how you can point that out. So you let us know when they get bumped, but what are the affirming characteristics, if you could, just like quick, you know?
Of course. So create structure, direction, and long-term coherence,
Okay.
right? Think of a city planner, right? You got to make sure all the things are where they need to be so it can run efficiently. And if people have signed up to do certain things, you're now depending on them to do those things. And then if they're not, that will create that friction.
Okay. Got it.
And there's even a neuroscience component too. So it's like your prefrontal cortex, the future planning, executive functioning. You can kind of operate a lot more in that space.
Yes, I love how you bring that in. Please continue to do that with the rest. I love
Okay.
this.
Okay. So architects are main characters not because they're loud, but because they see the map. When they're miscast, they become exhausted and over functioners.
Because they see the system, they see the problem, and then they overextend to correct it.
And that's me.
Because they need the order, you're right, for them to play their role. Okay,
And there's a
okay,
lot going on, right? But the next one is the stabilizer.
okay.
And so their primary function maintains emotional and relational equilibrium, right? And the neuroscience piece, so a strong vagal tone, attuned limbic regulation. Because when you think about emotions, how you relate to people, that's that midbrain limbic system playing a big role. The downside that people kind of can do is be people pleasing and self erasure. And then their miscast symptom is that there's anxiety and quiet resentment. These are
I used
often
to
the
live
strong
there.
friends. These are often the strong friends. Yeah.
Exactly, I used to live there. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
I
I was
mean, and that
so
could be
it'll
who you
be
naturally
interesting.
are, but then you just have to adjust, right? Because
Mhm.
we're talking about the types. So in a lot of ways, this is who we kind of naturally are.
Okay.
And then when you experience that frustration, you're not allowed to kind of show up the way you are. So when you say you used to live there, you may still be a stabilizer,
And I'll
but
find out.
you just learn to be like, how do I navigate being things that are aligned to you being a stabilizer?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna listen to the next 5 and decide if
Okay,
stabilizer is my home and I found my own balance, if I stabilized the stabilizer.
I love it. So the next one is the catalyst. So primary function initiates transformation, disrupts stagnation. The neuroscience, dopamine driven, novelty, and reward systems, right? The catalyst, you want the new things. Let's go. We're going to this next thing. We're making things better. We're accelerating things, right? Sort of the shadow self, restlessness, or abandonment of long term structure. Because
Mm,
you're moving to the next thing. You're like, you know what? It's not moving as quickly as I want. Let me just keep it. Let me discard.
mm.
The miscast symptom is chronic dissatisfaction. Catalysts can feel dead in stagnant systems. They don't need dominance, they need movement.
Aha. Okay. So this is what like a serial entrepreneur.
I can see that. Yeah. Where you're like, I kind of, but it depends, right? I think, again, we're kind of talking about the energy, right? That kind of animates
Yeah.
a person. So it can take on a lot of other roles or career paths.
Okay.
So number 4 is the visionary. I know a lot of these. So primary function holds the story of where we are going. The neuroscience lens, they're in default mode network. Their imagination, identity construction. Their shadow side is delusion without grounding. A miscast symptom is feeling unseen or dismissed. Visionaries aren't the loudest, they are the meaning makers. I
Hmm.
would feel like a lot of the visionaries that I know tend to kind of also be a bit artistic and creative. I think there's some of the coolest kind of main character types that a lot I know
Yeah.
because they kind of construct these worlds and then like connect the meaning to them, and I think that's always really exciting. But at the same time, I know a lot of times they can kind of stall out and have that stagnation that we talked about and feeling unseen when somebody doesn't connect to their vision. Number 5, the executor. Primary function turns ideas into reality. The neuroscience lands very task focused, habit circuits. So they there's a very process, right, that's been honed. I think a lot of
Okay.
people who've gone through traditional education or whether it's like military or certain programs that are very rich on process, what
Okay.
you're doing is honing this sort of neurosynapses in a certain sequence that get reinforced. So you're great at pulling things that may be abstract, putting it through that process to make sure that task is executed.
Okay.
So executives, so it's no surprise, right, that executives executors thrive with clarity. And so their miscast symptom is being burnt out from carrying everyone else's dreams. So the guardian, number six, protects the system from harm or misalignment. Neuroscience that threat detection systems balanced by moral reasoning. Their shadow self is hypervigilance, control. Miscast symptom is cynicism or emotional shutdown. Guardians often become too intense when the system lacks integrity. I think a lot of us have been played this role, especially when you were
Yeah.
younger, and you're like, "Don't be messing with my friend."
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
that's
you're
the
like,
thing.
"This is my ride or die. We're going." I think this is another very precious type that I think does definitely deserves its flowers. Number seven, the last but certainly not least, is the integrator. Primary function connects disparate parts into coherence. Neuroscience lens, high cross networking, social cognizance strength. The shadow self is diffusion of identity, and the miscast symptom is feeling scattered or undefined. Integrators are rarely recognized, but without them, systems fragment.
Mm.
And so for me, like I'm more like this the architect and the integrator. Like that's kind of my main character energy feels very animated when I'm playing those roles. But yeah, I know that's a lot, but what are you thinking so far?
Yeah, so, okay, I guess I still am the stabilizer, right, but found the balance
Uh-huh,
in
uh-huh.
it. There and I think, what was the one you said after the stabilizer?
So the catalyst.
Yeah, and I think I can be that professionally, like, with the work that I do with my clients, but, like, I think that's where it pairs together great with the stabilizer. So,
Uh-huh.
I would say, like, I have aspects of that, but just, like, me just being, yeah, stabilizer and having found healthy boundaries and applying them and expressing so that there isn't resentment, like, yeah, stabilizer, I guess that is my home. When I used to live there, I really heard it when miscast is there. That's what really made me say, "Oh, yeah, I used to live there." Yeah.
I feel like a lot of this, even all of these are connected in a lot of ways to superpowers.
Okay.
So think of like a superhero.
Mhm.
Their their powers are very specific. Right? If you match them up with a correct pairing with a villain, they're gonna kill it, right? But if there's another villain who has a different power, then it could absolutely blunt that superpower. So when we think
Mm.
about main character energy, we think about these seven types. They're gonna be optimal in certain environments, right? Where that
Yeah.
superpower is gonna be the best thing possible,
Yeah.
right? If you got a superpower that controls water and you live on a water planet, you won.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you got a superpower that controls water on an air planet, might not be the best.
I mean, you can make a tsunami,
But you
but,
gotta try to do it. But somebody else who may have air powers, right, wind powers
yeah,
on an air planet are gonna do better.
dominate.
So
Yeah.
it really is about like understanding, who you are and connecting this to your superpowers and putting your superpowers in an environment where they're gonna thrive.
Life moves fast, and somewhere between work responsibilities and routine, a lot of people stopped experiencing it. That's why I'm creating something different, curated global experiences designed for people who want beauty, culture, luxury, connection, and moments that are unforgettable from the second you arrive. Not just another trip, the kind of experience that stays with you long after you come home. This is your sign to join the VIP list before destinations are released. Link in bio. Quick pause. I've been loving Canvas Beauty, a Black woman owned brand all about confidence and self care. Shop canvasbeautybrand.com/Genie3 and use code Genie3 to save. Now back to Rise and Thrive.
Yeah. I love that. And again, you're speaking about environment, how that's important. And so many people are not in the ideal environment, especially if you're in transition. You're trying to make it, you're trying to get to the next step, right? Or that place where you feel secure. So sometimes it's an emotional environment. It could be physical, it could be educational, it could be professional. There's so many types of environments. And then sometimes it's even like location where you are in the world is a big part of that too, right?
Percent, a
Yeah.
100%.
Okay. So let's so what happens? Well, I guess you kinda talked about it, right? Like, when you're, like, really miscast and, like, when there's role confusion where you think you might be or the environment you're in requires you to be miscast or you have to be more.
Mhm.
What happens?
So, I mean, and I think that's life, right? To your point. There's so many times when we are in spaces that don't make us feel comfortable. I think as we've gotten as you navigate life, into adulthood and maturity, hopefully that's where we're talking because it definitely switches when you don't have autonomy or the ability to literally remove yourself from that
Yeah.
space.
Mhm.
But in a lot of ways, we don't, when we were younger, and not necessarily just age, but just younger in our sort of sense of awareness of who we are, which can happen
Mhm.
at any age, you don't know what's happening where you can take agency to remove yourself. Or you're just a lot of times we're like, we have to go through this. And in some senses, you may need to go through it for certain reasons.
Mhm. Mhm.
But when we're in that, I think what is the best thing to do is to be aware of the situation. So if you know, hey, I'm a stabilizer, I'm like, that's my main, when I'm in that space, I'm just so on, I feel so good. I'm in this environment where a lot of destabilization is happening. People are doing all sorts of things. What role can I play here to reach alignment? In a lot of ways, if you're thinking in that way, you can find it.
Mm.
There may be an individual who's thinking the same thing you are. You're kind of looking around for social cues, or you may need to take that moment where you're like, I'm only going to be here for a certain period of time. Let me maximize my time. Can I maybe realign my goals to be very specific? Because stress and friction are unavoidable.
Correct.
So we have to learn how to navigate that. But I think when you know the situation is not aligned to who you are, you can just have that information to better navigate it. You're like, when can I leave? Or if I have to be here, how can I navigate this? And maybe even use some breathwork techniques which are also very helpful when you're experiencing a high stress moment that you can't necessarily leave. You
Yeah.
can use your breath to absolutely calm yourself, help recenter, and breathe through this period of difficulty because it will change, it will get better.
Yeah, and I love how you introduce that doing breath work, but basically just taking care of yourself, that coping in the moment, right? And there's so many things that you can do, but your breath is something you can
Mhm.
always control. And you
Exactly.
have to breathe, and I think we take that for granted and we don't use it, or some people hold their breath. They're holding the stress in or like because they gotta hold I'm just trying to get through, so the tension is showing up in how they breathe that they're experiencing. So then now there are some people, and I think we both said this in the beginning, right? Where 1, we weren't aware of roles. 2, it wasn't a role that we were looking to have.
Mhm.
And so people are picking up on it and we're like, "I don't want this. I didn't ask for this." You know what I
Right.
mean? So, like, what do you think happens or what might be some advice for someone who is still figuring out what their main character type is?
Say you're still figuring out what your main character type is. Go to environments that are different than your norm. Experience different cultures, experience different environments. One of the beautiful things about the world and even about people is that they will start to respond to you in certain ways. And it doesn't mean that you take whatever that interaction is, as 100% truth,
Right.
but you can take it as 100% data. It is
Come on.
definitely information.
Yeah.
And so you just have a t-shirt on, right? I was talking about this with my sister earlier. We walk into a coffee shop, right? We're kind of ordering our thing, and then sometimes we'll be like, you feel something, you turn around, and there's this person that's in a t-shirt, jeans, flip-flops, maybe a hat, working on their computer, doing whatever, and you're like, I feel drawn to this individual. To me, that's sort of that main character energy and you don't know what type they are, but that's just that essence, that aura that is now drawing me, right? Me
Mhm.
being an architect and a what was the last one? Integrator.
Mhm.
Something about me is now being drawn to their aura, right? And then if you have that conversation, you can kind of like you're now both informing each other of
Yeah.
what's happening. I would say if you don't know, it's great to go a space by yourself where you feel comfortable. And it could be a concert, it could be a coffee shop, it could be just traveling. People will start to engage with you in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily who you are, it's more about who they are and what brings them to you. And then you can
Yeah.
reverse engineer that as data to then kind of start to piece together how and the why people are responding to your aura the way they are.
Yeah, and that's so good, that's so good, and I like also the superhero, analogy or metaphor that you gave, right? Because 'Cause I'm thinking about when a superhero doesn't know how to use their powers yet. Have you ever seen the show Black Lightning?
Yes, of
So
course.
remember when I forget the daughter's name, the youngest one,
Yeah.
when she's like experimenting with her powers and she's just pushing the limits, and then there's a free fall, right? And they're like, "Oh my gosh, that was so dangerous. You shouldn't do that. We need to get you a different suit." Like all of this, and she was just excited, but she had no idea how to regulate it and how to really and truly use it where it could have been dangerous, where she could have died because she overdid it, right? And
Mhm.
like was gonna like essentially about to burn herself out, literally. In the case of the show for anyone that's seen it, but I just thought that that was really fascinating and how they had to really teach her and train her how to use it because she has this thing. And so there are a lot of people that are operating with these gifts that come with the different types and haven't yet learned one how to make their identities connect with it because some people don't want it, or they don't want to be that way, or they want to be like everyone else in their family, their friend circle, whatever these environments are. And so I think it is a journey, like learning who you are, accepting who you are, and just operating there. But I like, what do you think are some of those things that stop people from really thinking with and just, with who they are and being okay and showing up in the world that way?
It's it's the constructed identity. And we use the word the observer of the observer last time.
Yeah.
It's the same situation. I think the identities that we construct don't want that. We want, the checklist. That's what our constructed identities have taught us to want. We
Mhm.
want the partner in this way. We want the house in this way. We want the yard in this way. We want the career in this way. But a lot of that is not connected to that spark within us that, was animated us from the beginning before we learned these were things we should even want. And I think that's exactly what's happening. There's not a lot of distance between that spark of a self and that constructed identity. And it creates that discord because that's what's happening internally. Those things are not they're not synced, as you said.
Hmm.
And that syncing occurs when you're like, let me release some things about this constructed identity I built and let me see like how I'm being perceived, how am I being aligned? Like when you have done the thing that you're saying you didn't want to do, how do you actually feel? In a lot of ways, when you were, that little kid doing what you were doing, you felt joy, right?
Mhm.
And then you learn to be like, oh, that's perceived as too much. And that doesn't connect to the constructed identity that you built. So you're suppressing that. And then in the midst of suppressing that, you are inducing stress to yourself.
Yeah, because it takes a lot of work to dim.
And exactly. And then when you learn to undim, unwind, you're technically rethinking.
Yeah.
You're redoing that constructed identity to match with your core self, and you're finding that you can rest more, right? You're getting better sleep. The skin is still skinny, you know? And I think that happens when that sinking occurs, when we kind of learn to unwind and learn how to align with our superpowers. Beyonce has it in the Renaissance album where she's like, I didn't want this power. And I think that's exactly kind of what we're talking about. Like that constructed identity, like doesn't didn't align with all of her gifts and all of her talents and the dreamer and talent that her core self is. And I think a lot of that is a lot of us. We didn't really want, like for me, like I didn't know what this presence was. Like I didn't want that. I was like, I'm gonna be a scientist. I want to do
And
this
you thought
work.
a scientist presented a certain way.
Exactly. And it took me a long time to learn, like, no, I love that about myself. I can dress in a way that makes me feel good. I can, move a room in the way that I want to move it, and I can like
Yeah,
talk
you
to
can.
people, and that makes me feel good, especially when it's aligned to a purpose that is dear to me.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. When you got the juice, you got the juice, right? And it really does take a lot to not. There's
It
so
does.
many people who spend time sabotaging and trying to outrun what is inevitable, like what their gift is, right? And they're still not content
Yeah.
because that's not where they're supposed to be or how they're supposed to be. But for some people, they'll settle for that because it meets that checklist, like you said. Yeah. And as you were talking about constructed identities, I think people can go through various iterations of that and construct multiple identities over the course of their lifespan, right? And
Hmm.
even when people when like okay, I think this is one that a lot of people can identify with. So it's once you leave like your hometown, whether you're just moving to a different state or if you're going away to college, there's a figuring out that needs to happen. Now, I will say I've seen this happen in the city where I'm from, where some people they went home. I mean, excuse me, they left and went to school, and then they ended up coming back home. They had a hard time adjusting because who they were there did not match with the constructed identity that they had or what was placed on them that they had embraced. It required them to do something different, to behave and present in a different way, where other people, they've gone and they've thrived
Hmm. Yep.
and they like take on the world and sometimes literally, right? And some they're okay being in their area where they know
Hmm.
predictability and there's comfort, but you don't some of them you don't see them kind of rise and thrive.
That's so true. But all of that is like technically okay. You know what I mean? In a
Yeah.
sense of like if they feel like there's alignment in what they're doing,
Yeah.
because it's about that exploration, right? And it's about being like, who is my tribe? You know,
Yeah.
what things about even my culture do I align to that make sense? And things that don't make sense.
Mhm.
I know you talk about faith on the show as well.
Yeah.
That's a big piece where sometimes certain faiths don't align with who somebody really is and can create a big struggle for people. And then when you
Absolutely.
find something else, you kind of are, in a lot of ways, you're like, because part of your core identity in some ways is really difficult to deny and it's really
Mhm.
hard to hide.
Mhm.
And so you get to a point where you're like, I I'm gonna decide to live. I'm not gonna let this kill me, literally,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm gonna just explore and see what that is. And that sort of opens the gates, I think, in a lot of ways for other things to happen. And to your point, the constructed identity iterates, and so does itself, right? Outside of that, like the things you may be open to now, you may not have been open to before. And that's okay. Like I think that we need a healthier sort of relationship with change.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love that you were bringing up faith because as you were talking about the different identities, and I was like, there's a spiritual component to this as well. Like, and I would think about it, main character, as like anointing, and everybody's anointing is
Mm,
different,
mm.
right? And you got to do your thing that's been given to you to do. So yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. So Can you live your highest life while playing the wrong role?
I mean, I don't know. I think that's tough to live your best life
It was
being
that
miscast.
highest. Yeah, but yeah. Yeah, miscast.
Think that's why we have so much unrest in society right now. I
Okay.
think people are starting to realize that they don't like the roles they've been cast in, even when they've done what they're supposed to do.
But was it what they wanted to do is the other part.
And I think that constructed identity did, right? That's where the effort has been put in. I think that people are now, I think especially as you get older, right? I think you start to have enough life lived to
Yeah.
reflect on, start to be like when, again, we kind of talked about this on our last podcast about pattern recognition throughout our own lives. So I think that it's very difficult to like be in your highest self with being miscast because there's a role waiting for you that your superpower, was going to thrive in.
Yeah.
So I think when you get a taste of main character role, you don't want to go back to being miscast.
Yeah, I do think that there might be some space in there for some people who might be like a hybrid main character, right? So you
Huh?
can do really well, and to everyone else it's amazing, but for you something's missing. So
Exactly.
you're living it externally, it's meeting all the markers. And people are like, "You gave that up? Why would you want to do that?" Right? And you're like, but there's something else. So I could see that it could present that way and you go to some really high heights and you're like, "Okay,"
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, for sure, because it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. And then even like people who may be aligned who then go into that space, a lot of times that achievement in and of itself
Mhm.
doesn't really connect to like a deep sense of satisfaction that's sustainable.
Yeah.
And if it does, it's typically linked to something else.
Yeah. Do you think being miscast might be the only reason why people are showing up tired or feeling tired?
I don't think it's probably the only reason. I think it's a big reason though,
Mhm.
because it's because in a lot of ways, like as we're getting into like the complexity of it, there's obligations, right, that
Mhm.
require you to potentially be miscast. So, if you are a new parent or, in a lot of ways, the constructed identity, especially, for women is like, I want to be a mom, you know? And in a lot of ways, you may not actually want to be a mom, and that's completely fine. But then there may be children now here that now require you to operate in a miscast role.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's unfair to you as an individual. And you find a way, but that compares with a lot of things. Somebody's taking on a job, an occupation, right? Where
Mhm.
you're like, I gotta get bread on the table, and I'm being miscast, you know, because I gotta do what I have to do. So I think, there's just realities that we can't ignore. But
Yeah.
I think what we're trying to talk about is how to find this alignment and how to have your main character energy thrive, you know,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
to identify that and find those spaces where you can have that experience because we do have it. Everybody has it in different ways, but how do we make it sustainable? How do we make it attainable? And how do we just have a realistic conversation with it? Because we don't have to be in main character all the time.
Yeah, and so as I keep hearing the word, right, constructed identity, right?
Mm,
And I think there are a lot of people who are trying to live identities or play characters that were constructed for them, and they never took the time.
yep.
They never took the time. They're doing this because this is what my father did, and this is what I'm expected to do, or I have to run the business. And they don't have the opportunity or feel like they don't have it to do so. Like, ooh, this just made me think about like Prince Harry, right? And how
Mm,
this identity was constructed for him.
completely.
And then we see him rebelling against it with all the partying and stuff that he did. And then, he finally meets Megan and then he like changed his environment.
Literally.
Literally. And it's just really fascinating how sometimes that pressure, well, while it may be well intentioned, or like parents who are like, you have three options. You're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a dentist. I don't know. But you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like
yeah,
you need to be one of those, right? And people break I've seen people really and truly spend years and thousands of dollars trying to attain this thing that they do not have the characteristics for. And it eats them alive, but they so badly want to make people proud or get approval that they sacrifice themselves and their happiness. And it's worse. It turns out worse than if they would have just gone with
yeah.
what was in them.
Yeah, and I get it. There's a fear of collapse, right? There's a fear of collapse. There's a fear of unknowing, like, if I'm now building a new identity, what does that even look like? That's scary. There's
Mhm.
real anxiety and fear around exploring that. And I think that, but to your point, there gets a point, I think, for certain people who start to live in kind of main character energy more often than not, where you faced some fears. You faced that fear of what would it be like if I did not align, if I did not sync? And you get to a point where you're like, life is short. I'm going to try it anyway. I think that one of the other characteristics across even these seven types to a degree is risk taking.
Okay.
You have to be a bit of a risk taker to exist in your main character energy.
Now, you gotta say more.
Yeah, I think that like part of the risk is disappointing people.
Mm.
Part of the risk is maybe I have to go without, these essential things for a while to maybe get realigned to who I am,
Oh, that's good.
So the risk can take so many different forms, but I think it gets down to that point where you're like, if I've got one shot at this that I remember, conscious of, why not? I think you start to kind of get there, and that
Yeah.
becomes a bit of a motivating factor to then explore. Because the worst case scenario is you can kind of always go back to the constructed identity. It's not going anywhere. And go through the pains and the stresses that you would go through anyway. I think it's more about, for me personally, the risk is in a lot of ways it feels worth it because, you're going to get the same 200 words in this obituary that anybody else is going to get. And just,
You just got real, real right there.
so you might as well make them the best ones. And to be honest, these are other people reading these words anyway.
Yeah, but also some people 200 words. Yeah.
So it's just like it starts to motivate me personally. These are the things that I use to motivate me to take those risks, to, feel grounded, doing something new or doing something different or wearing something more fun than maybe a previous version of me would not have done.
Yeah, and so, like, what you're also describing, I saw this video yesterday on TikTok where the, person, she was saying, it's cringe. It's always cringe before it kind of like pops or it's it. And when you're that person, like for you to become like she was saying, like to be the it girl, at some point you were cringe because you were
Mm.
doing something completely against the norm, right? Like you have to be willing to take that risk, essentially, like what you're saying, to do the thing, and then it picks up and then it's it. But like at some point it's cringe. Everything that pops is started with the cringe. And I
I
was
would say
like,
that cringe to me, if she's connecting that to like what felt authentic,
mhm,
then yeah. Because I feel like, because I think what connects it is like, I feel drawn to this. Like, I didn't do this for performance.
right.
You know what I mean? I think that is that thin line because it's that embodiment of sort of that your own version of weird or what or your own version of what you're drawn to. And to
Mhm.
others, it could be seen as cringe. But I think internally, you're
Right.
like, this actually feels good. Like it feels aligned.
It
So
feels
I think
good,
it's
but the
important.
cringe is worrying about the external, like, judgment part of it, right? And I think that's what
Exactly.
she was, yeah, getting, and I love the way you're putting this too.
Yeah, because you're
Yeah.
like the person doing it, you're like, this is kind of cool. I like this. Like I think it looks great. And you feel good in it. You were walking with it with confidence.
When you think about this, because 'cause you're like a systems person, right? So when you
Yeah.
think about these roles through, like, a system, like, can you, like, describe how that works together?
Yeah, I think when we think about this as sort of again like characters in a play, like that's sort of the play would be sort of the system, right? And then we have the characters playing certain roles with the play. And clearly right now we're talking about life as the play.
Mhm.
And how everybody in a lot of ways is a main character. And then there's just certain roles that do get more attention than others. They don't necessarily make them more important. I think that that is a clear distinction to make. And then a lot of times, people who end up getting more attention, a lot of them actually don't want it, which is interesting that people I think don't necessarily realize. But
Mhm.
all to say, that person who may not have as much attention and the person that has a lot of attention, their impact and value is actually equal. And I think sometimes people don't understand that. Just like the construction of a building, you know, there's those beams, there's the floor that's being poured. Those are all key, but so are the windows, right? That ultimately get installed, right? So are all these other pieces that may not have the role that the window may want to be the beam maybe want to be a window, but they all play together in the system to provide safety, structure, beauty, like it all really works together. And I think that's really how we technically all are main characters in our own lives.
I love that because I'm a visual person. So when you're speaking and my brain creates like visuals, sometimes it's pictures, sometimes it's
Mhm.
in motion, like a movie. But I was just thinking about that, like the beam, right? Like it's, well, depending on how tall you want your building to be or the type of building. But
Mhm.
I'm like, but in the end, you no longer see the beam, and the beam is essential. But sometimes the beam wants to be the sign out front.
Exactly.
And that can cause some serious issues in friendships,
Yeah.
in relationships. And so even as you were talking to, I was thinking of like searching for something to connect it to where you're saying every part is equal. And I don't know why I thought about the show Martin, how everyone is their own distinct character. And even the features or what do you call them?
The
Like
guests.
the
Yeah.
cameos, the
The
cameo
cameos.
appearances. So you had Bruh Man from the Fifth Flow,
Mhm.
had Shanae and Kilolo, and, was it Laquanda? What was her name? That they had the 3rd friend who would be on there sometimes. But and you had Biscuit, you had Lil Roscoe, like, you have all these
Come on,
people.
DC.
Right. But they could not no one could play anyone else's role.
No.
Like, the show wouldn't work wrapped
Mm-mm.
around Shanae, but Shanae very well. And Gina, Pam, Tommy, like,
Exactly.
everybody had their roles, and it would not have worked if any of them weren't okay with what their type was, like, what they
Mhm.
were cast for, but everyone thinks just being the center is it. Have you ever had the experience where you weren't trying to be like the
Yeah.
main character or the lead character, you know what I mean? But it just was, right? Like you're getting some of that attention organically, but there was someone else in the quote unquote cast
Mhm.
that wanted that space so bad. And like, how did you handle it?
See, this is interesting. I might have to flip this on you. You might have a better example than I
I'm
do.
okay to answer.
Because for me, I, in a lot of ways, like love being in a support role. I really do. I think that people end up kind of, because I am a very capable person and I have a lot of different skills, I've become comfortable being the main person. And for me, in order to be the main person, I first have to kind of understand what is it I'm bringing to this role that
Okay.
I feel driven by, that is connected to something that I think may not be able to be accomplished by whoever else may be competing or the option for it. And then if that really does align with the goal that's being accomplished. That's just kind of how my brain
Yeah.
works. But I've learned to be very comfortable in that main role. Like it took a long time to be comfortable with public speaking and being more extroverted and just being comfortable in my skin, no matter if I have a lab coat on or not, or if I have, fitness, or if I'm modeling or hosting or doing something to find that sense of grounding. So for me, I think most friction as I've gotten older can be solved through conversation.
Okay.
And so I personally don't really experience stuff like that as much anymore, like when I was
Mhm.
younger,
Mhm.
because I can put words to what's happening and typically reach a agreement. Because most friction is because of lack of understanding or lack of an ability to see the person's other side. So yeah, so I'm gonna switch it on you
Yeah.
and then see if you have a scenario that kind of.
Yeah. I think a lot of any times where I experience that, where similar to what I said in the beginning, where either people had no reason to dislike me, I had not done anything for them to feel a way about me or form a non-savory or positive opinion about me, or they wanted the spotlight on them. I never well, okay, I'm gonna back up a little bit because at some point I was conditioned to play a support role. And I think that's because that's what they knew and that's how they raised me. So I didn't grow up my entire life with my mom, right? So then I was, family stepped in and so I was raised to be the type of character that I think they knew how to be.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so they didn't know what to do with me. And then I think they also think or were thinking that it was for my protection as well. And yeah, yeah. And so it took me, so then, and that's what I would be supporting. But then somehow my name was being brought up. I was in the center, like people were drawn to me and I'm just existing, right? People tried to sabotage me in so many ways, like the
Yeah.
betrayal, the lies, like so many different things that I experienced because people felt threatened by me. And it's like, you're threatening it. I'm not even embodying it. Like looking back then, I wasn't even embodying it. I was still trying to be regular, for lack of a better word. I was trying not to stand out, right? And then Drake put it good in Say What's Real, I think it is, where he says transitioning from fitting in to standing out, where I
Mhm.
had to embrace that.
Which other people would see as cringe, but you're being authentic.
Yep. Yep. And so just like I had to get comfortable with that, but then also looking back, I had to note that being programmed or trained, raised, whatever word you want to use, to be more of a support character, it led me to maybe some misaligned friendships. Like, yes, there was genuine connection there,
Mhm.
but they probably knew before I knew that I didn't belong there,
A lot
and
of times people
so
do before
that
you do.
led to me being mishandled a lot of times and me allowing myself to be mishandled
Mhm.
because if my programming says supporting character, I'm not going to be as inclined to receive main character experiences, or
Oh,
I'll push
good.
someone else forward and me try to step back.
Yeah.
And so I had to come out of that and just like let it be what it's gonna be. Like, because sometimes, you're like, people are like, Chris, won't you da 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 da? But somebody else really wants it. And you're like, I don't want no smoke with them. Or they want it more than I do. Just let them have it. But
Yeah.
it doesn't work because the people sometimes that want it the most they're not even prepared. All right, beautiful people. If this episode has already blessed you in any sort of way, we ask that you like, subscribe, follow, share, and leave comments. Feedback helps this message reach the people who need it most. And if you're listening and thinking, I'm ready to go deeper in my healing journey, we invite you to join our school community where we continue these conversations between episodes. And it's an opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals committed to growth, healing, and purpose. Also, do not forget, you can shop the merch and also explore all things Evolve at evolvewithdrjnicole.com. If you love today's look and you're wondering about this hair, you can use my promo code with the link in the description to get 15% off with Eunice hair. That's UNICE. Thank you for rising with us. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
That's true.
And this is not being shady. This is just like a generalization.
Yeah.
But they want it for other reasons, for their validation, because they're searching for identity, and that being the main or the center is where you get that validation. But then those people, they're still not satisfied.
Yeah. I think it's that misalignment, right? It's like
Yeah.
when you're aligned to yourself and you're operating from that, you are within main character, no matter where you're going.
Yeah.
To your point, those opportunities. And to your point, I think being in the environments we have shared in
Mm-hmm.
university, which is very competitive, right? It's a
Edit.
very competitive place with a lot of folks that are intellectual, uh, not necessarily intelligent, but intellectual. We can have a whole talk about that, but competitive nonetheless. And in that, people are doing things that may necessarily not be aligned. A lot of times, people aren't aligned. It's just about the accolade, right? It's about the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
recognition. It's about what's connected to the treasure
The
once one
power and
gets that, the
influence.
power. So there are a lot of drivers for people to try to do things that are not aligned to who they are.
That's good.
Sometimes they do get them. A lot of times I think that's what happens. But I think at the end of the day, what's the great equalizer is when you are by yourself,
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
How do you feel when you go to sleep? Are you sleeping well? A lot of these individuals are getting 3, 4 hours of sleep. They've got so many different obligations. They may have multiple homes and maybe just burnt out. And other folks may have that and be perfectly happy, or may have less, or may have more. I think it really is that great equalizer is when you are with yourself, how does
Love
one feel?
that. Yeah, because in order for you to have it, attain it, it takes so much more because it's not your natural like skill set or
That's
talent. Going
true.
back to
It
what
does
you were
require more
saying,
effort for them.
being on the planet and you're wind, but you're trying to rock it out in the water world. And so you got to do your prep looks completely
I love
different.
that. Yes. You got
You
to
got to
create a new suit. You got to be able to breathe in the water now. You got to have a scuba gear, the tank, you got to refill.
this aligns very well with the most recent. What's the movie with the blue people?
Avatar?
Yes. Did you see the
Okay. Yeah.
latest Avatar?
I've seen most of them. Is there another one?
The one that it came out like we went and saw like Christmas weekend.
Like I've seen that most recent one.
Okay. Well, when you go,
But I love Avatar. I've seen the other two movies.
well, then it'll make sense what I
Okay.
was saying. And until there is a light. Okay. No, I'm thinking about that movie in a different way now. And what I know happens in the movie.
Mm.
But basically, you know what I mean? He had to have a breathing machine to like be with them and have a backup battery to be with them, right? Like, and so for his breathing machine, so like, I think that's also part of it. Like you can have it. And like you said, what happens when you're at home? So shifting gears a little bit, right? Because everyone's talking now about masculine and feminine energy and all of that. And like, what does that look like in this caste or system?
So for me, I go into like again like the energy of it. I think people talk about, masculine and feminine, and I think when they say masculine, they typically there's certain adjectives that come into people's brains as well as like with femininity. But they don't, but they're technically things that exist in all of us, right?
Mhm, mhm.
I think when
Break
you
that
think
down
about,
for anyone who's doesn't under I guess I jumped in too fast, and we should have started with, like, defining the masculine and feminine energy, and then what that looks like in the caster system.
no, but to your point, everybody has masculine and feminine energy, and biologically, the default is actually female. So when you go and you learn this, in human anatomy, which my doctorate is in, and of course my specialty is population genetics,
Mhm,
but you learn as a human embryology that the default is actually female. So two, double X chromosome. And so what happens is, the male has X and Y, and so when he contributes with the sperm, then it will fertilize with the Y or X. So then there's two X's or there's an XY. But essentially, then, and there are intersex individuals that then share even, different genitalia, etc. In general, the population does bend into people who have two X's or XY, and there's definitely folks in between and
mhm,
not those as well. All to say, just because somebody has an XY doesn't mean they're going to have all of masculine energy, right? And just because somebody has XX doesn't mean they're going to have all feminine energy or even somebody who's intersex. These are concepts that have adjectives that span sex and gender identity.
mhm,
And so, but typically masculine energy is characterized as like somebody's more direction oriented, or containment. They may be more stoic, more purpose driven, very kind of boundary driven. Feminine energy is a little bit more like flow, adaptation, relational intelligence, expansion. You're supposed to like hold space. But there's a lot of folks, like I said, regardless of their gender or their sex or identities, that's just not natural to them. And they have a different mix of that, regardless of what they look like. So I think as this relates to, main character energy, for me personally, like I know I have this sort of like androgynous energy. So I have strong masculine and strong feminine energy. My it just sort of has this little mix that I think has just been connected to me since I've always been who I am. And I think how my main character energy shows up, it really does draw people who are attracted to that. And so it ends up looking very different than friends or folks of mine that I know that may have a different mix of masculine or feminine energy. But I think it's about owning whatever your natural mix is and exploring that, right? Because I think there are, so you'll see it even in kids. I think it's really kind of there early on where certain kids are just very feminine. Like there's one of my friends, a daughter, she is just loves pink. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like she just came out wanting this. Cause I'm like, and I know they're her parents, and so they're very diverse and they're like want greens and very neutrals. But that little girl is just drawn to like really, really certain things. And you're just like, this is I thought it was all constructed. But she genuinely is just geared that way, right? And it just so happens to align, with her presentation. But I think that, the energy piece is it's much more fun because it's sort of this wonderful thing. It manifests as aura. And you can feel similar auras regardless of somebody's like race or ethnicity or ancestral background or being in a masculine presenting body or a feminine presenting body, you're like, ooh, there's just something that's drawing me here. And I think the more somebody sits with that and allows that to just be, um, you start to just live life, I think, in a different way. And honestly, it's more fun. At least what I found.
Yeah, and heard me laughing because when you were talking about that, I instantly thought about my goddaughter. My line sister is like, "Girl, I do not know where she got this from. Like, I don't understand." She was like, "I don't do makeup. The little girl wants makeup all the time." Like, and her uncle's like, "She's been here before." And
Yeah.
she just happens to be named after like her name combination is like multiple of her like grandmothers as well. So they're like she actually kinda, like, embodies it. They're like, "It's we don't know what's going on." Like, if it's, like, a spiritual thing that's happening, but some are absolutely like that, and when I look back and remember, like, me and my essence as a kid, I was that girly girl. I always wanted to wear skirts and, like, wanted to play dress up and, like, do all those types of things. Now, something that came to mind as you were talking is, like, survival mode and how sometimes that can shift people's energy and that depending upon the circumstances a person is living in, they may need to rely on more masculine energy to get through and be
For
direct
sure.
and then sometimes more feminine, but then I think some people get stuck in the trauma and the identity that came with the trauma and don't find their way back to the middle where that energy is either balanced or back at its natural state. And I think it does take a lot of like healing, reflection, self awareness to get back to being who you are before the world introduced all the things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think that's exactly what I think sometimes, when you feel somebody, you may have a connection with them,
Hmm.
whether it's platonic or romantic, it's so informative. You're like, "Ooh, this energy is so," it just feels like it fits with yours, right? And then and I'll talk about this from maybe first person, and then so you're engaging with that energy, you're vibing, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like we could be friends." But then you activate something in your mind, and then you're like, you know, what? The last time I dealt with somebody who looked like this, who didn't necessarily feel like this, but looked like this, it didn't go well.
Oh,
And then
that's
you
that
tweak
brain trying to protect you, yeah.
exactly, and then you start tweaking it and turning it and being like, you know what? Let me actually cut this interaction short and not deal with it.
Ooh, I think
I
that's an
think
invitation to heal right there.
it is, but a lot of us do that all the time and kind of can get in our own way and block our blessings,
Uh-huh.
and I think that that's around somebody's aura, I think still being what it is, but then that constructed self that's had to probably go through survival in different ways
Mhm.
activates and is like, no. And I think that that's kind of how that shows up in ourselves when we navigate things with people's auras that may really resonate with us.
Yes. That's such a good segue because I wanna ask you, like, what happens when in a relationship where both people try to lead versus operating in
Yeah.
complementary roles?
I think so. I was kind of researching this before our talk around like the seven types and how there are ideal sort of pairings within those that just kind of naturally fit. I think that there are fits that are not as natural and they just require more work. I think that that's the thing is not like, oh, I just got to find somebody who naturally fits. It's like if you find somebody that you still want, it's about starting to have more conversation, right?
Yeah.
Your superpowers are probably not exactly the same as mine, right? We may both have water powers on the water planet, but mine may work better when there's a high tide versus a low tide, right? Or so you kind of start to figure out what is that sort of way you can be even more powerful together. Because when there are similarities, you probably can do certain things even like as a catalyst, right? To improve that. The sun is like coming in on me.
Listen, it's
But
giving main character spotlight.
I like what am I talking about? But yeah, I think it just requires a little more work and more conversation when you both are the similar main character types. It absolutely can work. but it definitely requires a little more effort and more check-in to make sure you both are feeling honored and aligned.
Yeah. That communication is so, so important. So you spoke a little, you mentioned pairings. Do you happen to have like information on like those pairings that seem to
Let me see.
complement each other? Yeah.
So, I mean, see, I had broke some of these down. Let's see.
And where can people, is there a way that people can figure out what their type is other than self-identification?
Maybe we could put something together. We could
I
put like
think
a
that
little
would be
quiz or
so much
something.
fun. Yes.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah,
do
let's do
it.
that. Let's do that. That'll be fun. 'Cause I'm sure there's some zodiac, piece to this too. I love like astrology. So,
You know, people are ready to ask that question so quickly or tell you, right? But I also blame that song back in the day. Hi, my name is Larry, and I'm an Aquarius. You know,
look, we are in Aquarius season right now.
it's
I think
not
there's
over
some of the
yet.
most not you
I don't
wanting
know
it to be
why. I
over.
just thought
I
we were
love
out of it
this.
because we were in February. Okay, well, they got a few more days left.
I mean, low key, I know some really amazing Aquarius.
There's so many Aquarius in my history, just like
Well, I
and
feel
a
like
lot of
I just
friends.
really
Yeah.
kind of like started to clock it. For me, they're like that sign that you don't even know is like a sign because you're like, I don't know, where are these people? And you're like, well, it must be an Aquarius. And then that's where they are because other ones like are very clear. You're like, I know a
Yeah.
Virgo, I know a Capricorn, even know a Taurus, a Gemini. Like a lot of other signs you were like clear on.
So when I think back, like I've dated Aquarius, have had long-term friendships with cousins, all types
Uh,
of Aquariuses, and they're either very mild
uh,
or they're the most, right? Because
uh.
they're also an air sign. So
Exactly.
it could be a breeze or it's a tornado. So
Yeah,
you you're gonna get one or the other. And
it's
sometimes
true.
they'll do both, and you don't know how quick it can switch.
You don't. It's really interesting. I think
It
I
is.
appreciate them. I appreciate them. So I got the pairing. So we have architect and stabilizer. Look at that.
No
Look at that.
wonder, no wonder. We
Look at
always are like,
that.
"Hey," like, "We're in a space, we just gotta be close."
This completely tracks.
Yeah.
Architect and catalyst.
Which
Architect and
was my other one.
right. So we the top two. This is architect and executor, and catalyst and guardian. So this is like subcategories like disruption and protection,
Mm, this is
visionary and
fascinating.
executor, some narrative and tangibility. Makes sense. A stabilizer and catalyst.
Mhm.
So that's probably why you like yourself.
And just for to be clear, was that on the pod or a conversation where you talked about some people don't like theyself and it shows?
I think I said that about Capricorns.
I think so. Yeah, I think so, but I think that was an offline conversation. But continue. But yes, I do like myself.
And then integrator and architect, which is what I am too.
Mhm.
See, look
Mhm.
at us.
See? When you love yourself, it shows.
And then this is pairings that tend to struggle. So architect and architect.
That makes sense. 2
So
trying to
yeah,
lead unless they understand what part they can
right.
architect
I'm
within
thinking I'm
the
the best city planner. They thinking they the best city planner.
when really y'all in different environments, in different
Really,
cities.
it's
You
just me.
Chicago and you're New York, right? You know?
That's true. Catalyst and catalyst are not good together.
Mm,
So it's like there's five that when they're the same that don't work.
okay.
So architect, architect, catalyst, catalyst, stabilizer and stabilizer, visionary
Dang.
and visionary, and guardian. Which means like integrator and integrator are fine, and executor and executor are fine.
Which makes sense when you think about those. I can see
Mm.
that. You can't out stabilize me.
Mm. Look, stagnation. So you're right. We
Okay.
do need to make this quiz ready so people can start to figure it
Yes.
out.
Yes, I think this is like a fun way, but just offering it, allowing people to see themselves in a different way, like more based on behavior. Like, astrology is cute or whatever. And, you know,
Mhm. I mean,
yeah.
I love it. I think it's so good. There's definitely some
Yeah.
pattern there, but I mean, but now it evolves, right? Because then you know somebody's moon sign or their rising sign and
Yeah,
uh,
but some people,
all
they
that.
blame their bad behavior on their sign. And so that's why I was like, you know what I'm saying? Well, versus what we're talking about today is a little more
For
tangible
sure.
and how they're like actually living. So, yeah. Okay. Let me see. So, what does role mastery or like character mastery look like in a healthy love, leadership, and legacy?
Hmm. I think it looks like our conversation right now. Clearly, our like main types and our subtypes are just completely aligned. I think it really is around that ease of
Hmm.
interaction.
Yeah.
I think when I'm talking to you, and maybe you probably have this with everybody, since you're a stabilizer, you probably do. It's probably why your guests like love being on and why you've been successful with this.
Thank you.
I think you create a space that feels comfortable. And I think when there's that pairing that's there is that ease, where you're like, you know what? I love Jeannie. Like, I can't wait to see her again. And you start to be like, I want to have a drink, or I want to do this, or I want to have, do things together that align with my own interests and hoping that you would share that, and have a
Yeah.
space where you could do that together. For me, because I know the type of partnership that I like, and even whether romantic or aromantic or platonic, it's around camaraderie and a
Hmm.
companion. Like that's sort of the ideal partnership with me where we can do stuff together,
Absolutely.
and do stuff sometimes look like being on the couch watching TV, or scrolling to social media or laughing about a pastime, whether that's in the house, or out and about. So for me, and that's why I think to me, like, I can bring a lot of my friends together and I don't necessarily have to worry about certain things
Yeah.
because in a lot of ways, everybody's going to find their own thing. Everybody's going to be respectful for sure. I think there's a general sense of alignment. And I think in a partnership, with an individual, I think having that compatibility, that camaraderie, that companionship centered where you're both like, life's a journey and we've decided now to do this together. How do we make this journey exciting and entertaining and fun and also real, right? Because there's going to be times where it's not any of those things. There's going to be hard times. There may be some health issues. There may be, things that happen to you or happen to somebody you care about that now affects you. Is that person going to be able to be supportive or, be dynamic to be available for?
Thank you, Chris. That is such a wonderful compliment that you've given me. And you're not the first person to say that about creating that safe space. And I think that is one of the highest compliments that someone could give to me, right? And I do believe that that is my gift. And I think it's gotten even stronger because I've taken time to do my healing. So I've charged my superpower and I mind my
Mm,
business now because I'm not overextended and don't have resentment and over trying to do other people's emotional work, right? So now that my stabilizer is stabilized, I have that much more to give, surprisingly.
now you
And
can
so,
catalyze in your catalyst.
come on, that's it. You're right because then I've been doing a lot of stuff. A lot more things have poured out of me. I think that really does speak to alignment and these types being your superpower. And when you are balanced, it leaves room for so much more. And I think there's a space to be excited about. And so many of us want predictability, we want control, we want to be able to anticipate. And sometimes that's how we can miss our main character moment or that moment that like really solidifies that, right? Like, this has been really good. If you could leave the audience with one powerful truth, what would it be?
It's connected to the last powerful truth I left on the last series, which was about, again, chosen family. I
Yeah.
think And in this context, it's around your chosen family is your cast, right? You're not miscast when you're within your chosen family.
Come on.
And I think that that is so true. Like everybody has their role, everybody's playing it. For me, like my reel of best memories are connected to friendships, and people that I've just become close to, where I have felt the most authentic I've ever felt. And even as I make new friendships, there's new characters that are kind of popping up, and some of them last, some of them don't. But that's all okay.
We learn. We learn. And, that's so good. I love that. And I'm going to keep it positive, right? Because there's another side, because there may be some work that we need to do. If you are feeling out of alignment, environment, because sometimes that matters a whole lot. Not sometimes, that matters a whole lot,
Yeah.
all the time, every time. Okay, well, as always, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here on Rise and Thrive with Dr. J. Nicole. Now, audience, this is where we're going to shift to you. Where in your life might there be role confusion or overfunctioning rather than operating in alignment with your role, with your main character, or the types that were shared here today by Dr. Cross? And then I want you to take action and identify what role you're currently playing in your work life, your romantic life, and your personal life. And then ask, is this the highest and most sustainable role? And then finally, I'm going to leave you affirmed. I honor my role, I embody my purpose, and I operate in alignment. So I want to thank you again for tuning in for another episode of Rise and Thrive with Dr. J. Nicole, where we are rising in faith and thriving in purpose. Please, please make sure you join my school community. You can find the description for that. You can find more resources there so that you can continue to grow in faith. And to complement this, you'll be able to check out the series on spiritually aligned friendships and working through those amongst other things. And as always, make sure you like, you subscribe, you share, you leave comments. Tell us what your archetype is. So down in the description, we also have a link for you to take the archetype quiz to find out what your role is. And let us know what that is and like how much that aligns or how much it doesn't. Like we want to hear feedback from you and what that looks like in your relationships, your life, your professional life as well. And always check out the merch. You can go to evolve.drjnicole.com and scroll down, click shop the merch, and it'll take you to an array of awesome merch that you can wear to support the podcast and continue to help it grow. Dr. Cross, if they want to stay in touch with you, how can they reach you?
So you can reach me on my website, the-strategy-lab.com, as well as on socials at The Real Dr. Cross on Instagram. And even on LinkedIn, you can type in my name and Cross. But it's the LinkedIn/IN/C-Cross-PhD. And I would love to connect with you.
Awesome. And so can I just tell you something? The Real Dr. Cross only made sense to me about a week ago when I finally watched Cross. I thought it was a cute name. Then I was like, oh, I get it. But yes, again, thank you all for tuning in. We will see you next week. Thank you for showing up every week and supporting the podcast. Thank you so much for supporting me. And it's just an absolute honor that you are giving your time to tune in every week. So thank you so much, and we will see you next week.